Hi, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here with Tara Brach. Tara is an internationally renowned meditation teacher and best-selling author. Two of my favorite books of hers are Radical Acceptance, and Radical Compassion, her newest book. She's the founder of the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, D.C., and she's helped countless people around the world through her work, bringing together Western psychology and Eastern wisdom traditions. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Tara.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm really glad you're doing this. Yeah.
Oh, it's so great. First of all, I'm just curious how you're doing and how COVID-19 has impacted you personally.
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking because, like for so many, the crisis is close in. I've got a pregnant daughter in law who's been working at a large hospital, high risk. I've got friends losing parents. I have a couple of my Asian friends that have been attacked, verbally. And then the African American community, friends from the African American community, knowing how they're getting the brunt of it. So a lot of agitation and fear and sorrow. And of course, it makes me so grateful for meditation practices, just to have a way to be able to pause and quiet my mind and turn towards the vulnerability that's here, not avoided. And so I can just hold myself and others with more compassion. So yeah, the practice has made a world of difference.
Yeah. Oh, that's really lovely to hear. It is like that these are the times that we practice for, right?
And that is what so many people are. I get emails from all over saying, you know, I didn't realize it, but this is it. This is what I most need. I'm so grateful. So yeah, it's so true.
hmm Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to ask you a question that actually connects both of the books that I just shared that you wrote, Radical Acceptance and Radical Compassion. When I first read Radical Acceptance, I really saw myself in your story, as I'm sure many people do, and I also realized that I I wasn't fully in touch with how little acceptance I was actually extending towards myself. And I think many of us don't really have a profound sense of how much acceptance or self-compassion we're offering ourselves. So I was just wondering, especially like since right now your work is focused on compassion, if you could speak to that, like our insight into how much self-compassion we're extending towards ourselves.
Well, I love your question because I think for most of us, compassion is actually the last thing that we're inclined to do. We have so many other
Mhm.
reactions. When we get frightened, our first reflex is fight, flight, freeze, and we usually are somewhat at war, where we either turn on ourselves thinking we're messing up in some way, or we blame others, or we get really small. And so we're not actually in a mind state that's conducive to compassion. And it's not until, as you said, we start actually hearing about it and learning about it that we can look and say, wow, am I being kind? And it's such a
Mhm.
powerful question because what we find out is, first of all, that we're not. And second, as we begin to practice, what an incredible difference it makes that even a gesture of kindness, just even some sort of saying to
Mhm.
ourselves, it's okay, softens, opens. It's a kind of homecoming.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I mean, could you speak to how self-compassion right now can be supportive to us in this time of uncertainty and fear?
Absolutely. Um, First of all, fear is kind of universal and it's spiking. And I think of fear as nature's protector. It's it's not our enemy, it's actually alerting us. And if we can in some way say to the fear, thank you for trying to protect me. I'm okay. If we can bring some compassion to the fear, it actually quiets it down. And if you look at it in terms of neuroscience, in the moments that we become more mindful and we become kinder, the prefrontal cortex gets activated and the limbic system quiets down. So it actually helps us calm the fear by being kind to ourselves and also when we're kind to others.
Yeah. Can you actually talk about that link between offering self-compassion to ourselves and others?
It's it's actually a very direct link. The dynamic of compassion is this, that if we can get in touch with our own vulnerability, in other words, if we can let ourselves feel right in this moment, okay, I'm scared, I'm afraid, and maybe we
Mhm.
whisper it and we kind of honor, okay, it's right here, I'm feeling it, and then we deepen and we actually feel it, then the natural response is a quality of tenderness towards ourselves. It's just as if there was a young child who
Mhm.
was scared, and as soon as we really get that they're frightened, we go, "Oh, honey," you know? And yet we have a very strong conditioning not to open to feelings. In fact, one wise sage, when people would bring their troubles to him, he'd say, "Ask yourself this one question: what am I unwilling to feel? What am I unwilling to feel?" And
Mhm.
the reality is that if we can feel the fear or the hurt or the grief, then compassion will arise. And once we've been with ourselves in that way, we're much more able to stay present with another when they're frightened, instead of our habit of kind of
Mhm.
dissociating or going into a lot of mental obsessing and worrying, we actually can stay embodied and present and caring and offer comfort. And that makes all the difference. But we have to be able to be with our own feelings to
Mhm.
stay steady with another.
Well, and it's so difficult to touch into that vulnerability. Like even acknowledging that self-compassion is needed. I feel like there's so many of us who are kind of triggered by even the words like self-acceptance, self-compassion,
Mm,
self-love.
mm,
It's
mm.
almost like, why would I need that? Right. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about that. I think, for me personally, growing up in a house where, I had an abusive father emotionally and physically. And so I didn't grow up with a ton of love, like
Mm,
the feeling of love and safety and support and acknowledgement, that kind of thing. And
right.
so I wasn't taught that as a child. So I wonder if there's a link between, like, it would make sense to me that there would be a link between that and then not offering myself that self-compassion. It's something that I've really had to work on in my life. But in general, do you find that that's the case? Is it very common that people kind of hit a wall with self-love and self-compassion, those qualities?
Absolutely. And I think the way you described it is really wise because how we were treated ends up determining, in a lot of ways, our attitude towards ourselves. And if we were really criticized, or if we were ignored, or if we were abused, we're going to be critical, negligent, and abusive towards ourselves. And it's going to take more practice. And that's what it comes down to. Most of us in this culture start off being somewhat at war with ourselves. There was one woman described being with her mother when she was dying. And I tell this in Radical Acceptance, I think. And her mother was going in and out of a coma. And at one point, her mother opened her eyes and looked at her daughter and said, "You know, all my life, I thought there was something wrong with me."
Hmm.
And then she closed her eyes. She died. And those were her last words. And for my friend, this was an amazing wake up because it was like that sense of, wow, it's such a deep habit in us to think there's something wrong with us, that we don't deserve kindness. And just to see the experience of her mother through her whole life, that helped her be committed to, I'm going to be kind, but it takes training. And as you say,
Hmm.
if we weren't modeled it, there's an attachment psychologist, Luis Corzelino, who says we're not survival of the fittest, we're survival of the nurtured. And nurturing is not some, fluffy, lacy, nice thing. It's actually necessary for us to be able to have healthy intimacy and bonding and inner confidence and so on with others. So if we didn't get it, then we need to do what I sometimes call spiritual reparenting, which is learn how through mindfulness and self-compassion to offer it inwardly. And it takes time and patience, but it saves our life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember that story from Radical Acceptance. I remember I cried when I was reading it. I almost started crying again
Mhm,
hearing it because
mhm.
it was so beautiful. Um, and this is such a big part of mindfulness and meditation as a teacher to strengthen these qualities in us. A lot of the time people ask me about how we can become good meditators because their mind is always wandering. And often what I'll share is, I mean, obviously our mind is going to wander because we're human. And more important than even having strong concentration is how we're responding to ourselves during meditation. And if we can respond to ourselves with kindness and non-judgment and compassion, then we're actually practicing properly. And I feel like this practice has been a really big part in kind of reconditioning my own, my own ability uh, to practice self-compassion. So yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Well, I'd love to hear, I'd love for you to share your rain practice that you share in your book because it's so profound and so supportive. Would you be willing to kind of take us through that? I know there's kind of a long and short, short version of it.
Sure, sure. Well, I'll describe it and I'd be glad to actually walk us through, if you'd like, a very brief light rain. But
Mm,
the rain meditation is a weave of mindfulness and self compassion that's brought to difficulty. So it's not something new, it's based on mindfulness and self compassion. But when we get into circumstances that are challenging, those are the times we most need meditation and it's the hardest time to remember even what to do next. So rain gives us an easy to remember sequence that we can go through to help bring us back to open-hearted presence. And the R of rain is recognize. It means just recognize what's going on. You might mentally whisper fear, fear. And the A is allow, and that just means let it be there. You don't have to love it, but just pause with it. Be respectful of that. That's what's here right now. We just allow it. The I is investigate. Investigate does not mean a mental cognitive investigation. 90% of the investigation is find out in the body how your body's experiencing this right now. Because our issues are in our tissues. And if we can feel it in the body, then we can do the N, which is nurture. So investigate, maybe feeling a squeeze in the chest, and then nurture is just offering some kindness in some way. And we can do it with a touch. I have my hand on my heart right now because that helps so many people. We can do it with words, just saying a brief phrase. I, for years, was saying, it's okay, sweetheart. Just a very simple phrase. We can have an image of light and warmth coming in. We can even have a sense the nurturing's coming from a dear friend or from a grandmother or healer or Kuan Yin, the Bodhisattva of compassion. It doesn't matter where it comes from for nurture. And then the last part is what I call after the rain, which is really essential because that's when we stop doing and just rest and notice the presence that's right here. And what we can notice in those moments is a profound shift that is from, let's say, being a fearful self to a space of compassionate awareness that's more the truth of who we are than any story. And that's where the freedom is. So I was working with one woman whose son has the virus just recently. This is just last week with rain, and just as I described it, she's really anxious about it spreading to her family and the whole thing. She just started whispering, "Okay, anxious, anxious." She paused, allowing it. She investigated and could feel a kind of a pressure and a tightness and a clutching here. And I often, during investigating, say, just put your hand on your heart or wherever you feel the unpleasantness, because that'll help stabilize the attention there. And it also begins the nurturing. And then for her, the nurturing was just, thank you for trying to protect me, to the fear. I'm okay. And she found that that gave her more space to be with the fear. I mean, there's just more room for it. It was there, but it just wasn't overwhelming her. And it let her show up for her family. Instead of being this scared mother that was trying to control things, she could be a place where others could talk with and be with. So as anyone's listening right now, if you have a fear or anxiety or strong emotion, you can just practice that light rain, just to mentally whisper the word that comes to mind. It might be anger, worry, shame, fear. Just allow it to be there. Say, it's okay. Let it be here for now. You might sense if it's in your throat or your chest or your belly. And experiment with touch, just a light touch. In fact, let the touch be tender. So you're already nurturing. You can nurture at any moment. You can't nurture too often. Just feel it, feel where it is, actually breathe with it. Because if you can contact where the difficult emotion lives, then you can authentically offer some kindness inward and sense whatever message of comfort right this moment the fearful place most needs to hear. Whatever words, it could be, I'm here, I'm not leaving, or this belongs, it's just part of me. Or as I sometimes say, it's okay, sweetheart, or thank you for protecting me, but I'm okay right now. And just in these few moments, just sensing who you are, the presence that's here, as larger than the fear. You can do rain as a light rain quickly, you can slow it down. You can do it with a partner. On my website, I have a whole lot of resources for doing it with someone else, because that can be so beautiful, a way to be intimate. And it's never a one shot, but the good news is each time you do it, you start learning the pathway back to a kind of inner refuge of open-heartedness and strength and presence.
Well, Tara, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. It's you're such a. I find your teaching so nurturing. There is something so warm and nurturing about them, and uh, one of the things that I hear often from users is that meditation opens them up, and they often find themselves crying, and that's confusing to them. And when I started actually doing practices that felt nurturing to me, I felt something open up too. And
Mhm.
I think many of us still do. It's such a precious thing to be able to create this space where we bring loving kindness, nurturing emotions, we direct those towards ourselves. So I was just curious if you could share a little bit about that, like that interesting connection between offering ourselves that and it evoking tears.
Absolutely. One of my teachers says that if you haven't wept deeply, you haven't begun to meditate.
Mhm.
Because we have layers in us of all the different emotions, and the sorrows and the grieving are actually embedded in them as a love for life, and we need to weep, we need to sense the ocean of tears, and as a way of kind of melting some of the hard casing around our heart. So it's just part of the practice. We also need to laugh. It's as much as we need to pay attention to the pain and the vulnerability and be honest with it and touch it and feel it, we also need to look around and see. I mean, for me right now, that kind of lime green of the leaves of the trees, that this springtime, and just feel that vibration of green in
Mhm.
my body, and see the light in a child's eye, and celebrate too, because we have that negativity bias that keeps us in some way fixating on the what's wrong. And so to live in truth means to touch the 10,000 joys and sorrows both, but don't skip the joys.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. Just before we leave, I wanted to share that I receive a lot of emails as well about teacher training. There's a lot of people that, start meditating and they are interested in making it a life path. Usually my response is meditate for 10 years and then let's talk again. But recently, I've actually been directing people to your mindfulness training program with Jack. You're one of the teachers that I think are just so credible and have so much to offer people in terms of teacher training. So I was just wondering if you wanted to share a little bit about that.
Well, thank you for bringing it up first. I appreciate it.
Hmm.
It feels to me more than ever when we see our world in crisis, the world falling apart and people suffering, we need guides. We need people that can support each other in being able to work with the fear. And instead of reacting to fear, learning to react with love and wisdom. And so if ever in my life I'm deepening my commitment to teacher training, I feel like, yes, you're right. We do need to have a deep practice. And we have, in our program, there's certain criteria of how many, a handful of years of practice, a daily practice, having attended a retreat. We actually now have online retreats given the coronavirus. Um, the reason people find the program powerful is that people get divided into small groups. So you're working with a mentor close up online, and it allows people from all over the world to participate. We have, in the current cohort, we have 1,400 people from almost 50 countries. So it's a really juicy mix of people. And the
Hmm.
emphasis in the teacher training is to be able to know the practices of mindfulness and compassion, and to bring it alive in relationships, and to know how to work with trauma, and to know that meditation and the spiritual path isn't just on the cushion, but has everything to do with actively engaging in our world in a way to make a difference. So it's very well rounded, which is, I think, part of the appeal. And so I invite anyone that would like more information just to go to my website, and you'll see different links to the teacher training there.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
that's just your name, tarabrach.com.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. And we're just so happy to be able to share your thoughts with everyone. So,
Well, I love just working with you, because you just bring so much passion and care and intelligence to it. So bless you and your voice for guiding so many. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
dear.
you.
Yeah. Many
Okay.
blessings.
You too.